Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Unit 9. There are a couple of mathematical symbols that we may not be used to seeing or we may not be familiar with that are going to be very important to this chapter. So I wanted to take this first video to go ahead and introduce you to those two symbols and kind of do some practice problems using those. The first one here is the square root symbol. Now, you very well may be familiar with it. It's something that you may have seen or even used, and there's a specific symbol on your calculator that we're going to use quite a bit for this symbol. Essentially what the square root symbol is asking is what number times itself equals whatever's inside. For example, the square root of 4 is 2, because 2 times 2 equals 4. We'll study this in great depth in this chapter, but for this particular video, we really just have to be familiar with how to use it in our calculator. The second symbol is what I call the plus minus symbol, but more specifically, I call it the plus or minus symbol. This is not in your calculator. There's no button on your calculator that would represent plus and minus at the same time. Really, what the symbol is saying is that you have two problems here. So, for example, if I gave you 7 plus or minus 1, that symbol is actually saying that you have two problems. You have to do 7 plus 1, which is 8, or 7 minus 1, which is 6. Two problems, two separate answers. We're going to get this type of a problem a lot in this chapter. So let's do a couple of examples where I'm actually going to incorporate both of them. In this case, it says to evaluate these expressions and round answers to the nearest hundredth. So remember, a hundredth is 2 decimal places. You look at the third. If the third is 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, it tells you to bump the second one up 1. If the third decimal is 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, you keep the second decimal place exactly the same. First thing I do every time I have a problem like this, when I recognize that there is a plus or minus in the problem, I write this out as two separate problems. It's going to make your life easier. This is the same as saying 3 plus square root of 8 over 5, or 3 minus the square root of 8 over 5. That just makes your life a little bit easier because now you have both of them written out. You know you have to solve both of them. The second thing that's really important is putting this in your calculator. That's all we have left to do, but it is a skill. I can't type in everything just 3 plus square root 8 divide 5. I can do this in either one step or two steps. If I'm going to do this in one step, which I do not recommend, you have to have parentheses around the entire numerator. Parentheses 3 plus square root 8 end parentheses. Now I'm not even going to do it that way on this video. I'm going to show you how I would recommend doing this. Type in everything in your numerator first. 3 plus. Now the square root is here above your x squared. So it's in blue. It's above your x squared button. You have to hit the blue button first. The square root of 8. Notice my arrow is still blinking inside my square root. To get it out of there, I'd have to press the right button. Now I'm not in the square root anymore. All I've typed in is the numerator. Hit enter. That gives me a decimal. I'm not going to write that decimal down. I am not going to round yet. It makes no sense to do so. Now that I have an answer for the numerator, I'm going to divide by 5. Just press divide by 5. Don't type the number in again. You want it to say ANS, means answer. Take your previous answer, divide by 5, and hit enter. Now I'm going to round this to the nearest hundredth, because that's my final answer for the first part of the problem. 1.165, I don't care about anything after that. The 5 tells me to bump the 6 up 1, it's 1.17. 1.17. Or, do the same thing, but now I have to subtract. Instead of 3 plus the square root of 8, I have to do 3 minus the square root of 8. I can hit enter whether I'm blinking in there or not. Take this answer, divide by 5, and hit enter. 0.034, the 4 says keep the second one exactly the same, so it's 0.03. That's it. I've just simplified that expression, or I've evaluated that expression. Go ahead and press pause. Try to get the answers to 2, 3, and 4. When you're done with all 3, unpause to check your work. For number 2, we get 0.33 or -3. Number 3 should be -1.21 or -0.22. If you don't have the 0, no big deal, but you need the 0.22. Make sure you did not make rounding errors. I will take points off for rounding errors. Number 4, if you did correct, you are going to have some calculator issues. There is more to come on this. Let's stay tuned, but if you got this message, error, non-real answers, you're correct. And we will explain why that is and go into more detail during class and as we get further along in this chapter. The last part of this video is just to be able to do some substitution. We're going to be studying a formula that is going to be using something we call the discriminant. It's an expression. This is part of a bigger formula, but it's a part that we have to be really familiar with using and putting into our calculator. The actual discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. B, a, and c are all variables that are going to represent things. The key is when I'm using this and I'm putting it in my calculator, I can put it straight in my calculator as long as I do this. Put parentheses around everything I'm substituting. So, for example, if I know a is 2, b is -6, and c is 14, I'm going to automatically use, that's my b squared minus 4 minus a, or minus 4a and c, and substitute into those parentheses. B is -6, a is 2, c is 14. So that's exactly what I'm typing in, including all of the parentheses and negatives and everything. Parentheses -6 and parentheses squared minus 4 times parentheses 2 and parentheses open parentheses 14 and parentheses, hit enter, -76. That's my solution for the discriminant when a, b, and c are those values. Go ahead, press pause, and find the solution for the discriminant for numbers 6, 7, and 8. Unpause when you have all 3 done. So for number 6, we should get 48, and number 7, 0. Why 0? Well, because 8 squared is 64. If we're doing order of operations, I have to do all this multiplication next. 4 times 8 is 32, times 2 is 64, and when I subtract those, I get 0. And for number 8, we get 1. -3 squared minus 4 times -1 times -2 is positive 1. More to come on this stuff as we get into class, and we will be using both of these skills quite a bit for this chapter.